What is up, guys? Welcome back to the channel. My name is Travis. Of course, this is TWA Motorsports, and today we are back on the blue car. Yes, my son's car here. And what are we doing? Well, in the last video, we got the motor in, right? That was a big chunk. We robbed the motor out of the Trans Am. You can see I've got parts absolutely everywhere, but we robbed the motor out of the Trans Am because I'm going to build a little bit stronger one for the Trans Am. And still waiting on parts, so no sense in rushing things around. But guys, some of the things that are done to this motor, I don't know if I talked about a lot of them in the last video. It does have a Texas Speed 228R cam. It has a set of Texas Speed LS6 heads. It does have the trunnion upgrade on the rockers, which his had that. His had a cam in it too, but obviously the motor was trashed. And I don't know if I showed you guys these, but I think I did in the last video. But every single rod is bent. Don't know what kind of pressure they were running here, but obviously it was a lot. But anyway, we're going to continue today putting this thing back together, and hopefully we get a little further. But he has been cleaning on the intake. It's looking really good. A couple things that I thought about right before I was thinking about putting this intake on in the last video. But guys, the map sensor, this thing had no mass airflow sensor, so that means it was running a speed density tune. Well, what does that mean? Well, the stock map sensor in the back of the intake here only registers up to, what is it, 14.7. So I'm assuming this thing went above that as far as boost goes. So a lot of times people will put a 2-bar map sensor out of like a Cobalt SS, or they will put a 3-bar map sensor in. A 3-bar is what I put in my Trans Am in a video a while back, but I still have the stock one. So we're gonna swap out the map sensor here, guys. All you have to do is pull this little plug back, pull that thing out, and get it swapped over. The other thing we're gonna do now that he's got it all cleaned up is anytime we pull an intake off, we wanna take a look at our intake gaskets here. You see these guys? We need to rip those out. I got a new set of those. So we're gonna go grab those. I'll list all these parts in the description down below, guys, but that's pretty much our next step. We'll get those swapped over. I'll show you guys once we get them in, and then we'll get this thing in the car. So he has the intake gaskets he's putting in. I already swapped out the map sensor. Guys, that thing's a pain to get out. You kind of got to just pry on it a little bit, and basically it pops out. But other than that, he's getting new GM seals in. You just need to make sure that you're careful. You push them in lightly all the way around, then go around them a couple times, making sure they're nice and seated. While he's doing that though, I'm gonna come over here, plug in my light, and I'm gonna take the tape off of the intake, where the runners are at, basically on the heads. I don't know how long that's even been there. I put this motor together quite a while ago, but either way, I need to go ahead and get that off, get it ready to put our intake in place. At this point, guys, we're ready to put the intake on. Got the new gaskets in there. Hopefully you guys can see that. The other thing we have is, remember our one lonely bolt that wouldn't come out that we had to put the tape on. Got it and the bracket back on here. So a couple things we need to do. We need to plug in that vacuum line right here. We need to plug in the map sensor here. And then honestly, guys, your clip for your knock sensors is supposed to set on this guy. So a lot of stuff going on, and then of course you need to route your brake booster. I know it's a lot, but either way, I did go ahead and wipe this off. And so what we're going to do is we're going to set it in here. Actually, I'm going to get the knock sensor moved over just a hair. I don't like where it's at. You don't want to mess it up. Obviously, you don't want a knock sensor error when you're going back together. And I need to find our map sensor plug back in this mess. Don't see it. I'm sure it's here somewhere. All right, I'm gonna have to, oh, there it is. All right, so you know, that's kind of a reach. We're having to reach back here and kind of plug that in blind. No other good way to do it. The other thing, guys, is this routes around that oil temp, or that oil sending unit, and I've broken I don't know how many over the years putting these things in and out. But we're gonna move this back into place. In the meantime, I'm gonna be plugging that stuff in, and then we'll get some of the bolts started. Hopefully we can line the holes up. So I gotta show you guys this. When I pulled this out, I was like, man, this is really weird, because generally an LS6 intake requires 4 bolts being taped up. Yeah, it does. Here's why. Check that out. They did some that was not broke off in the head, guys. That I know for sure. So they cut one down to fit it in there. How dumb. But either way, we're gonna go ahead. I've got another one, so not a big deal. We're gonna go ahead and get these kind of hand snug down, and we'll talk about the torque specs and the sequence, because there is a sequence on this as well as torque specs. We got the intake hooked up and everything in place. Got the right bolts in there, guys. So we need to torque this down. 44 inch-pounds first pass through, 89 inch-pounds the second pass through. We're gonna start in the middle and work our way out. So the middle bolt on the passenger side is 1, directly across from it is 2. So the center one on the driver's side is 2. Back one 3, we go back to the front on the passenger side 4, the next one up from the middle. And then 5 is back on the passenger side from the middle. 6 is up here. 7 is the very front driver's side corner. 8 is the very rear passenger side corner. 9 is the very rear driver's side corner. And your last one, 10, is the very front one on the passenger side. So hopefully that makes sense, guys. There's a lot of manuals online if you want to look that up. But 44 inch-pounds and then 89 inch-pounds. We're going to go ahead and torque that down right now. Now that we got the intake on, all torqued down, guess what? Time for a fuel rail. Now, I was worried that these weren't stock injectors. Or they were stock injectors, and that maybe was the problem with the, the pistons and the rods. But they're actually 60-pound dekas, so that's good. I'm gonna keep these in here, guys. We're gonna let the tuner know when he flashes this new file that it does have an aftermarket set of injectors in it. But I'm gonna go ahead and set this thing into place. Generally, they've still got a little bit of stuff on them, so we shouldn't have a problem with them seating. I clean the ends off a little bit, but you just want to make sure they get down in the cups. You don't have any issues. It feels like it went in nice and snug. So now we just need to get our bolts that hold the rail in and snug that thing down. Should be 89 inch-pounds on that as well. Got that fuel rail torqued down. So now, guys, you got a couple different options. I'm gonna go ahead and hook up the fuel injectors. So these guys here, right? We need to go through and just plug them in. Make sure that, kind of give them a tug and make sure that they go into place. But the other thing is, this thing had an aftermarket fuel pressure regulator, not regulator, but fuel pressure gauge. And so I noticed when I was putting this together, a lot of fuel came out of that. So I'm gonna have to remember, and I'm just gonna write it down right now, that I've got to get a Schrader valve to go in the end of this fuel rail. This is meant to be a test, and I think I may actually even have one, but if not, I definitely need to order one, because what's gonna happen, guys, is the first time we go to start it, this thing is going to puke a bunch of fuel out of that rail, and we don't want that. So, not as big a deal doing it when the engine's not hot, but once you get the injectors plugged in, you can go ahead and kind of put your cable holders in place. I'm gonna leave these guys unplugged. So the coil packs, I'm gonna leave those unplugged right now, because we may end up taking the coil packs off in order to get the headers on. It just it generally makes life a little easier. So, but I do wanna go ahead and get these lines on so they're out of the way. Then once we do that, I'm not sure what we'll move on to next. We'll just have to see. I think he's got the throttle body all cleaned up. We may put it on next. Now that we have the throttle body on, there's only 10 bolts that hold that thing on. And this is a really nice throttle body, guys. I was just telling him, it looks like Shaner is a big brand, or was at least back in the day. This one has the throttle stop back here ground down, and then it has a really nice port job on it. I don't know who did it. Doesn't say anything on it. It doesn't have, some of those guys did what they called the epoxy mod, where they put epoxy up here. I don't really love that. So I don't know what brand it is, but we need to torque this thing down. 89 inch-pounds is generally how I torque them, guys. And then we can go ahead and plug in our 2 sensors here. Actually, we can go ahead and do that now. Get those 2 guys plugged in. And then these 2 are mass airflow sensor and your IAT. I'm a little concerned. I feel like there's a little bit I don't know. We'll just have to see when we get the IAT sensor in, but that looks like a reach. Maybe it's not. Maybe it's just an optical illusion because the box isn't there. But either way, I'm gonna go ahead and torque that down and we'll move on. So guys, it's been a couple days since I stopped filming that last section, and he got all the spark plugs out, intake's on, throttle body's on, and then he actually, guys, has been yanking out every single piece of the interior and cleaning all of it up. It's looking really nice. He's doing a really good job. He's cleaned all of these parts here, cleaned all the panels. He even took the carpet out, which is laying over there on the floor, you can see, and we're gonna scrub that down. But the next step that we have, guys, is we need to put a pilot bearing in this thing. So got a couple things here. For one, I got a pilot bearing. It's sitting in my freezer. We got to hammer that thing in there flush. So instead of just trying to hammer it in there with just a regular hammer, I chose to get a bearing installer. I'll show you guys here real quick. One of these guys here. Actually, I guess I should have opened it up so you could see. But it's got several different sizes in it. Actually, let's go to the outside here. Show you what we got. So I don't own one of these. I probably need to buy one, but this smallest one should work. So it comes with that guy and then something to hit on. So we'll thread this together. I'm gonna go grab the bearing out of the fridge or out of the freezer. It's really hot out here, so it should go in relatively easy, but we need to knock that thing in flush. You know, this was not a motor that had one in it, so we don't have to worry about pulling one out, which really sucks. Sometimes they're a pain to get out, guys, but we do need to put one in. And if you want to double check, I'll list the part in the description down below, but it should fit on the end of the transmission shaft there. So I will test that, but it's kind of one of those things. I'm going to run and grab it real quick, hammer it in, and kind of show you guys after the fact. Well, as you can see, guys, I've got it in there. It is nice and flush. That's what you want. You want it flush in this. And I did test it on our output or actually input shaft of the transmission. Like I said, I wanted to do it really quick because it was frozen. I put it in the freezer. It just makes it easier going in when you do that. So we're all set now. I think at this point we may go ahead and put the headers in, or we may put the bell housing on, but well, actually we would put the clutch on before the bell housing. So maybe we'll grab the clutch and go ahead and do it since we've got it up in the air, and then move on to the headers after we get the clutch and the bell housing on, and then maybe we can get the transmission up. But we'll just see if the headers are gonna interfere, which I think they might. We may have to wait and do those after the bell housing and the clutch. Here's what I think we're gonna do first. We're gonna do the clutch. So guys, I got this, and I'll list in the description down below. It's an LS7 kit. Clutch kit, comes with everything you need: flywheel, new bolts, the whole shebang. It comes with all of it. So we got our new flywheel here. We need to get that up into place. Obviously, guys, it does go on a certain direction. Make sure that you put the end that's facing down here. I can't even lift it with one hand. We need to put that end. This is the side that goes up against the engine. The other side is the side that comes towards us. Now, like I said, it comes with a couple things. I opted to get the alignment dowel because you're gonna need this unless you have one. I definitely recommend that. Comes with new flywheel bolts, new, maybe new bell housing bolts. I don't remember. I think maybe it's just flywheel bolts. Honestly, actually, it looks like it comes with flywheel and flex plate bolts. So either way, we'll get those popped out of there, but I'm gonna get this thing out and set it up into place. So he's got it up in there. Guys, there's an alignment hole that you can see, this guy right here. So you just need to make sure that you've got that lined up with the hole in the crank. The other thing is, if you're reusing your factory bolts, put some Loctite on them. Because this kit comes with new ones, it already has a Loctite built into it. So we're gonna go ahead and get those on there, and then we'll talk about torque sequence. Now that we've got these guys started, I did get my flywheel locking tool, guys, because here's what's gonna happen. We're gonna start to torque these down. I'm gonna have him do this. And look, when you torque them down, this thing's gonna wanna spin. And the only way we can keep it from spinning is either have somebody try to hold it, which it gets to the point where you can't because the torque that we need to put to it. So this is a good tool to have. You also need this if you're doing the crank bolt sometimes. So not always do you need it, but anyway, got that on there. Let's take a look at the torque specs. I wrote all this stuff down because I didn't want to be going back and forth here. So the torque specs on the flywheel, because it's sequenced. We generally start on one, go to the opposite side, similar to what you would put on a wheel. But the flywheel itself start at 15, so you're gonna torque them all to 15, then to 37, and then finally 74. So you can imagine trying to put 74 on those, and that thing's gonna wanna spin. Got these things torqued down. Now we need to grab not only the clutch, but we need to grab our alignment dowel, the clutch, and we need to grab the pressure plate. So we're gonna, before we do that though, we're gonna take some brake clean and clean this mating surface off. Now it looks pretty clean, but you know, fingerprints from putting it up in here, any oils that got on your finger, you want this nice and clean. So we're gonna clean this just similar to what you would do to a brake. So no different there. Let's go ahead and get it clean and then grab the stuff and start to sandwich it together. You can see we got it up in place. The other thing, guys, is on the on this guy, on the pressure plate, I actually wiped that off because it's got a mating surface as well. We've got the clutch in the middle. The clutch does have scribed on it which side's the flywheel side, so make sure you get that right. Get your alignment dowel in. You have a little alignment dowels coming out of the actual flywheel itself. You can see those here, here at the top. And it, like I said, it does come with new bolts. So we're gonna start threading in the new bolts. While we're doing this though, here's what wants to happen, guys. The only thing the clutch is really in is this alignment dowel, or alignment, I don't know what I'd call it. It's an alignment tool is what they call it. But what happens is, just because of gravity, the clutch wants to settle down. So you kind of need to hold it in the center while you're tightening these things down. If you don't, you're gonna have a terrible time trying to get the input shaft of the transmission into here. I've just had experience with that where I tightened it up like this and didn't hold that, and I had a terrible time, ended up having to loosen it all back up and do it again. So just be aware of that, because that clutch can move around inside there. Once you get all 6 of these bolts in, I snugged them down by hand while I was holding this, like I said, in the center. 15 foot-pounds on all of them. Same, I generally go bottom, top, right, left, just like you'd put on a wheel. So 15, 37, and then finally 52 is what this torques down to. Now that we're all torqued down, guys, he's gonna grab the bell housing down there, and we're gonna get it into place. And guys, I'm just reusing the factory hardware. 37 foot-pounds is what these bolt down to. Now, some say, like a Hames manual says 26 foot-pounds. Probably wouldn't hurt to do that. But look, everything torques to these aluminum motors at 37 foot-pounds. GM calls for 37, so 37 is what we're going to do. Now that these things are all torqued down, guys, we're gonna go ahead and grab the transmission. So make sure that you don't leave this guy in there. The other thing we need to do is we're gonna put a little bit of lithium grease on the very end of that, and then on the splines. So right here on the end, and just a hair on the splines, just to make sure it's nice and easily slid in there. And then we're gonna slide it in. We're gonna try to line up the splines. This part takes a little bit sometimes, but what I will tell you is I did choose not to go with the new Slave. This one looks like it's in great shape. I'm gonna wipe it down just a little bit, but obviously, guys, this needs to set on that input shaft as we're going together. And then not only that, but you have the two 10 millimeters that go in here, and those guys are gonna torque down to 106 inch-pounds. So not foot-pounds, inch-pounds. And so we need to do that at the same time. I'm probably not gonna be able to get the camera up in there and show you guys this, but once we get the transmission up in place, we'll be able to slide this over the end, get those 10 millimeters started. And I would recommend putting just a hair of Loctite, just blue Loctite on those guys, because you don't want those to back out either. Well, guys, check it out. It is in. I probably should have set the tripod up and showed you guys our struggle. The only real struggle we had, to be honest with you, was just getting it close enough without the shifter hitting. Honestly, guys, we probably should have taken the shifter out here because it was interfering with the tunnel. Had we taken the shifter out, I think we wouldn't have had as much issue. But the first issue was getting it close enough that we could get the Slave in place and get it snugged down. But once that was in place, then trying to get it, look, these have polyurethane bushings in them, and they just don't have as much give as the factory rubber. So you don't get as much fall of the engine, I guess. It has way more fall, obviously, with a transmission on the back of it, but we need it to fall a little bit more to get the input shaft lined up with the center of the clutch. and everything to mate up. But we were able to get it. It just took some wiggling back and forth. I actually let the jack down just a hair and just by hand came back here and wiggled up and down, kind of moving back and forth, and it went into place. So we did go ahead, the jack's out of the way. We got the 8 bolts in here. We do need to go ahead and torque those though. I snugged them way down, but they need to go to 37 foot-pounds. The top one, I don't know if you guys are gonna be able to see it, but this top one up in this top right-hand corner, so there's actually 2 on each side. So the 2 that would technically be on the top, they line up with a vent tube brace, which I am gonna put in, but I generally put that one in last. So I'm gonna torque all of these and then put that one in last, just because it kind of interferes with me torquing the other ones. Got all these torqued, guys. I did plug in the other side here. There's just one plug on the passenger side, then this one's the rear O2, which we'll just have to tie up out of the way. But for now, I'm waiting on a trans mount. We don't actually have that yet, a new actual rubber trans mount. I'm not gonna use a poly one. I've just had bad luck in the past with vibrations with both poly mounts on the motor and poly on the transmission. It's just overwhelming. So we're gonna put a rubber mount back in it. But at this point, I'm gonna tie up some stuff. See this wire, this red wire that's hanging down here, and then the speed bleeder? We're gonna tie that up and get some heat film on it. The way it was ran before, you can see that it runs right up beside the header. I want to run it under this factory heat shield, so we're going to do that and kind of fish it out of the way at least. I just don't like where it's at. So that's our next plan. We're going to take these a couple 7mm out. You can see the heat shield right here. We're going to take that guy loose, and maybe we can sneak behind it. Maybe we don't even have to take it loose. It's not even got both bolts in it anyway. You know, the further away from heat we keep stuff, the better off it is. So this thing when we got this car was mounted on the bottom, and I really think that it needs to be, most people mount it up like by the reservoir so you can bleed it up there. So that's what we're gonna do. And like I said, wrap this. So I'm gonna do that off camera, and then I'll kind of show you guys. I think our next step will be to get the headers in, but before we do that, obviously, let's get this away from the heat. We were able to get that routed back where it's supposed to be. So guys, we put loom on it all the way to the back, hit it up in the factory fuel lines, and that is a hot wire kit for a fuel pump is what that is. Put some heat tubing on it. See that there in the chrome? That'll just keep the heat from the header away from it. We also tucked it back behind all of the heat shields. So it looks really nice. We also took up that speed bleeder, put it up there on the top side, went around the steering column. Really can't see up there, but the only other thing that I've done, guys, off camera is I did go ahead and put our 10mm back in for our little closeout panel here. You know, it doesn't have to be there, but I always like to put it there just to keep dirt and debris out of the clutch and transmission. So at this point, guys, I think we're going to feed the headers up in here. And so what I think I'll have him do is I'll have him feed up a header to me up top, and I'll get a bolt started, or maybe even you could put a couple bolts in from the bottom, especially on the driver's side with the K-member like this style. You just have so much more room than what you're normally used to with the factory K-member. So we'll just kind of go back and forth. I'll probably start here on the driver's side and we'll get it started. Like I said, I'll probably just have him feed it up to me, and that way I can hold the gasket and start the bolts. We are going to be using ARP exhaust manifold bolts. And what you need to do here is they need to torque down 11 the first pass and then 18 the second, but you need to start in the middle, so that very middle cylinder, and work your way towards the back. So I start with the 2 middle ones, go to the next 2 outer ones, and the next 2. Also, we're going to be using new GM gaskets. I don't know where they're at. They were sitting right here on this table, but I don't see them now. So we'll have to run those down. I don't know. Oh, there they are right there. So these guys right here, they do have a specific side, guys. They have a manifold side and a header side, so make sure you're getting them in the right way. But I'm gonna jump up there and we'll see if we can get a header in. We did get the headers on. So a couple things we had to do though, guys. I've never put the headers on with the coil packs on before, so he was down here holding, and I will say we have a lot of room with the K-member. You know, there's just not a lot of K-member there. So, you know, we've got a lot of stuff to plug in, but I wanted to show you guys the headers kind of up into place. Like I said, guys, 11 foot-pounds the first pass, starting from the middle and going out, 18 the second pass. It's a tough fit, that's for sure, to get the torque wrench in there. But either way, we got those on, and I'll try to set up the tripod for the rest of this. I don't even know, like I said, why I didn't set it up to show you guys both the transmission and us getting the headers in, but we're good now. I'm trying to think of the next thing I want to do. I'm probably going to put some more of that heat wrap on some of this wiring here, because some of it has peeled off. You can see like the crank position sensor here. It needs to be, I really think it needs to have more than just lume on it, even though it's not super close to the headers. And then I'll probably put another piece on this right here. But I'll show you guys that. Once we get that accomplished, guys, if your crank bolt is not tight, we've still got our flywheel holding tool in here. Now would be a good time to go ahead and tighten that. Mine's tight, so I can go ahead and take this out, but I want to get this stuff wrapped up. I'll show you guys that before we go back with the starter. So I'm not really sure why I didn't talk about this, guys, but we put, if you guys are wondering what kind of headers, I'll list them down in the description like all the other stuff, but they are Speed Engineering, and they fit really well whether you have a K member or not. But like I said, at this point, we're gonna wrap up some of these wires here in order to get things in place. And then I think I may have him work on the trans cross member here and getting some of that stuff back together. The goal here is to get all, like even the drive shaft back in at this point. So we're gonna grab the torque arm mount, which just kind of clamshells around that, and get it into place, because that has to go in place before we can move this out of the way and get the mount in. And then once we get the mount, we can get the cross member in. He's actually cleaning the mount up for the torque arm, but we did choose to go with, and I said this earlier, but a new GM replacement rubber mount. Okay, so not the brace, but the mount itself. These are 13 millimeters. Guys, the spec that I find is 38 foot-pounds, so we're gonna go ahead and torque those down. Once we get that torque down, then we're gonna go ahead and get that clamshell in place. Not my favorite. I mean, this is an aftermarket torque arm. I don't love the fact that they mounted them on the rear of the trans. It just puts a lot of force on those when you're, especially when you're getting on it. But look, that's what we're going to use. It's what the factory used. They do make another one though that mounts to the tunnel. A lot of people go to those. I don't know how strong these mounts are either. That's generally where they bolt to, but that may be something we upgrade to down the road. Just depends on, kind of how he uses this car. But either way, let's get those torqued down, and then we'll get that shell around the torque arm. Now that we got that in, let's talk about torque specs here, guys. The 20 foot-pounds is what happens to the top one. So it's just the short little bolt that goes in the top and the top of the clamshell. This bottom one right here gets 30 foot-pounds on the nut, and then 37 foot-pounds on this guy, the long one in the front. So that's pretty much it. Now we're gonna grab the cross member, use this little screw jack to bring the transmission up. And as a matter of fact, what we might do is we may go ahead and put the drive shaft in before we do that, just because it just gives you a little more room to work with, in my opinion. I mean, we don't have to. In fact, I tell you what, we're not going to. I take it back. We're gonna go ahead. He's gonna grab the mount. We're gonna put it up in place, and then we need to get our nut in place that holds the center of the transmission, and then of course the I think they're 15 millimeters that hold the actual brace itself. Now that we got that brace in place, he's torquing it down. 66 foot-pounds, guys, on the outer bolts, and then 77 on the center, the nut in the center, which is an 18. 15's on the outside, 18's in the middle. Well, we got the drive shaft in. All you gotta do is, obviously, guys, just slide it into the end of the transmission far enough forward. Luckily, the thing's in neutral. We didn't have to put it down or climb up there. Spin it around to where your U-joint lines up, and then put your straps on. Those go to 16 foot-pounds, so not a lot. It's crazy to think that only 16 foot-pound bolts those things on, and that is the power from the transmission, the motor, to the rear end. It's just nuts. And this is aluminum. Of course, always the first thing that breaks on these cars. Most people break a drive shaft or rear end in a 6-speed, so hopefully he doesn't do that. Anyway, on to the front. I still haven't put the heat shield on that up here, so I need to do that real quick, and then we will get that all tied up and get the starter in. He's taking our flywheel locking tool out right now, and then, guys, that, like I said earlier, that's a huge benefit. You need one of those. But either way, I'm gonna go ahead and put the starter in. So guys, in order to do that, obviously you have your two 13s that hold it to the block where the flywheel locking tool he's pulling out goes, but You also have an 8mm that puts on the trigger wire, this guy here, and then you have a 13 that puts on the power wire. So I'm gonna put that on first before I worry about trying to put heat shielding on it. This already has heat shielding, but I really can't do what I wanna do without the starter in place, because we're gonna have to put a little on this side just because we don't have the factory K-member, we don't have anything to tie to. So we're gonna try to find a way to tie it up to the frame rail over here, but I'll kind of show you guys once I get it in place, and then we'll talk about the starter torque specs. Now we got the starter in. This is the older one, guys, that had the short bolts on the one side and the longer on the other. Once we got those in and you've got your 13 and your 8 hooked up on the back like I talked about, we need to go ahead and torque these to 37 foot-pounds. The other thing you see that he's done is he went ahead and put the O2 sensors in. Bought new Denzos, guys. I really recommend these. They really perform well. I actually like them better than any other brand. So that's what I'm running. And then I thought, actually the part number that I ordered, and that I'll link down below, are supposed to come with 24-inch long leads. These are the 16-inch versions. So I don't know why. I think they just got misplaced. It's not a big deal because I had some extension harnesses here. That's what these guys are. And you can make your own if you just want to solder a connection in there. You can make them longer. It's just more time consuming stuff, and generally all the wires are the same color, so it makes it kind of confusing unless you cut them one at a time. So either way, we got that stuff in. Like I said, guys, I'm gonna kind of zip tie some stuff up. We're gonna plug everything in basically from here back. Now we're not gonna have O2s on here, so these two guys we're just gonna have to tie up, because we're not gonna have catalytic converters because we live in Mexico and we're not required to have any kind of sniff test or pass emissions, so we don't have to deal with that. But the rest of the stuff, like the speed sensor that goes on the back of the transmission, the reverse sensor, I think there's a reverse one here, is one of these. We're gonna go ahead and get those plugged in all the way back. Then, like I said, I'm gonna put this heat shrink that you see, it's not heat shrink, but heat protective cover on this section right here that goes up close to the header. We'll get everything zip tied up, and then I will bring you back down here and look at it. We'll be completely tied up on the bottom side, I think. We're at the point now, guys, where the only things that we need to do on the bottom of the car are, we need to put the exhaust on, obviously. So from the header back to the intermediate pipe or cat back, but everything's tied up. So you can see I put some heat shielding on this guy here. We zip tied it to the motor mount. We've got it tucked up on the top where the oil feed would be, and then coming down and getting onto the fuel lines here, zip tied to that. Everything's all tied up, nice and tidy, like it should be. Same thing on this side. We've got some heat shielding on these wires that came down, so you can see we've got a little bit of protection here from the manifold. Hopefully that's not too snug. I think we're probably fine. It's got enough for the engine to move around. Tied it up to the side of the frame rail, or subframe, whatever you want to call it, and then put some heat shielding on it for where it's up kind of close to the exhaust here, and then run it back and zip tie it to the transmission. Everything is tied up where it needs to be. So at this point, like I said, all we need to do is put the exhaust on. I don't know that I'll show you guys that because you've seen us do that in the past on this channel. It's just a Y pipe that plugs in here, and it's from the same company, from Speed Engineering. It's gonna go here. It's gonna have a couple clamps. It's like 3-piece. Once we get that in, I may show you it, but I don't think I'll show you it going together. And then we need to let this thing down. We've got a power steering leak. I noticed on one of the hoses, if you guys can see that. So we're gonna have to pull the power steering pump back off, which kind of sucks. But other than that, I think the rest of this stuff, guys, will be done from the top. I may put the AC line in. We bought, the AC line had rubbed on the sway bar, so we may put that guy in while we're down here. And I think somebody asked me, can you sneak that through with the compressor in place? Man, I sure hope so. I think so with the K-member like this style, but with the factory K-member, I just don't think there's any way. I think you would have to have the line set in there before you could do it. Off camera, guys, we did a couple things. We did take the compressor back off, just took the 4 15mm out here, and I'll get a light over here so you guys can see a little better, but there is no way you could sneak this line in from behind. And this is kind of how it needs to go. So the line that goes to the bottom of your condenser, you can see we bought a new line. I'll list it in the description because remember ours was bad. It had a hole worn through it from the sway bar. What I'm hoping is this sway bar fits, and I think it's going to without hitting it. I think it was more the turbo issue than it was anything, but So the line that comes to the bottom of the condenser is on the bottom. So that's the hard line you see on the bottom. The one that goes up there to the dryer that you see up there, which we got a new one of those, I'll show you later. That line comes down, loops, it has the plastic on it, so that line should be on the top, but there is no way to get that in there without taking that compressor out. So now that we got it back in, we got everything snugged down, 37 foot-pounds is what that goes to. And then I just snugged down the back, guys. I couldn't find a torque spec for the line set that goes in the back. But now that we've got that, we're gonna go ahead and put our 13s back in our sway bar. We're gonna go ahead and get the belt back on and tighten this all back up. Well, we got this thing back down on the ground after getting the line set in for the AC. I did go ahead and put the 2 heater core lines back on the water pump. And guys, guess what? We have a leak in our power steering pump, which if you guys remember, we never took the pump off. We actually unhooked it from the bracket, and then we just kind of zip tied it or used a bungee cord to hold it up here while we took the motor out, because there's no sense in unhooking that unless you have to. Well, the downside is we're gonna have to. There's a leak on the back side of it. So guys, I think that's where we're gonna end this video. We're definitely making some progress though. Obviously we got the motor in now. We got a majority of the stuff finished on the bottom side. The only real things we have to put on the side of the motor, or we have to put spark plugs in. Obviously we need plug wires. We need to put the oil fill in. But aside from that, I probably, like I said, I'm gonna end it here because we're gonna swap this out off camera. You guys got to see me take that off in earlier videos on this car. So no sense in showing you a replacement of that. I think what we're gonna do is we're just gonna rob the one off my Trans Am. I know my poor Trans Am's getting all the parts robbed, but look, we're nowhere close there. So either way, guys, like I said, if you are enjoying this video, please, like always, smash that thumbs up button. Guys, if you are not subscribed, go down there, hit that subscribe button. Of course, ring the bell icon that notifies you every time we drop a new video, and stay tuned to hear this thing run.